Geoff Woods, welcome to the World Class Dads podcast, brother.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Hey, you too. You too. I'm excited. I know we've chatted a few times on Millennial Mastermind. I've, followed your content for a long time. We got connected. You were actually guest number one of the Millennial Mastermind podcast about 5 years ago. So you kicked off my podcasting journey. So this is bringing it full circle.
It's crazy that it's actually been that long.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm sure that you probably don't remember much of that conversation, but I have gone back and listened to those early ones, and it's painful for me to listen to. So thanks for bearing with me. Hopefully this one's a little smoother.
It's kind of funny how when you host a podcast and you go back and you listen to your early episodes, you're like, oh, I was terrible.
Yeah. It's cringeworthy, but like anything, until you get started, you're not going to be very good at it.
That's right.
Well, so for some of the folks who are listening, who haven't come across your content, don't know your name, would you mind just giving the, I guess as quick as it can be, it's hard to do, but summary of at least your professional journey to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'll preface by saying professionally, I've been on a journey of becoming a family man with a business. Not a businessman with a family.
Okay. You sound like John Vroman a little bit over there.
Where do you think I got it?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's definitely one of the guys I surround myself with. For those of you that are familiar with the book, The One Thing, it was co-authored by Gary Keller, who's the chairman of Keller Williams, the real estate company, and his co-author, Jay Papasan. It's one of the highest rated business books of all time. I partnered with them 5.5 years ago. The three of us co-founded this company called Productive, where we turned the book into a company that helps people invest their time by getting clarity on the things that matter most and actually having it reflected on their calendar so they do the most important things and achieve extraordinary results. And you and I got connected prior to me co-founding that company. I was in medical device sales, which was, a great job. Ran through hospitals every day, sold a device to save lives, tried to get my wife to call me McDreamy. But I was at this place in my life where even though things were good, something was missing. And it took some pretty significant things happening in my life to force me to make a change. And it was first a colleague had a stroke when he was 35. My wife and I had a child. Wife decided to become a stay-at-home mom, and we bought a house in Orange County, which wasn't cheap. And I remember standing in the kitchen wondering if what happened to my colleague had happened to me, what happens to my family? And the next week, my company changed my commission structure. I lose 40% of my income overnight. Those two things back to back really made me pause and realize that it was time. It was time for me, even though it was uncomfortable to pursue entrepreneurship, it was the right thing to do. And you fast forward, it's our national sales meeting. Jay Papasan, who co-authored The One Thing with Gary Keller, was the speaker, talking about why the one thing is the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results and how Gary used it, literally lived these principles to build Keller Williams to the largest real estate company in the world. And I cornered Jay when he came off stage. It began a relationship. I had no idea they were looking for somebody whose one thing would be the one thing. I ended up being the right guy. And so I moved my family to Austin 5.5 years ago and have turned this into a pretty successful company. We work with individuals, teams, and organizations from small businesses to multiple of the Fortune 500.
Man, I love your journey so much. And it's been an inspiration. You had your podcast, The Mentee, that really was one of the reasons I got into podcasting in the beginning. So it's had a big impact on me, and you have. So I appreciate you just sharing that journey and continuing to do so now with the One Thing podcast. When you first decided to get into entrepreneurship, you mentioned you had 2 young kids at that point in time. There were all those changes on the professional side, and then also just in your personal life, some eye-opening experiences with the colleague having the stroke. But do you recall just what that experience was like as a husband and as a dad deciding to make that transition into entrepreneurship, and what emotions that brought up for you?
Oh yeah, viscerally. I have always had jobs where I made a good income. I'm a really good sales guy. So I've always had sales jobs from Xerox to medical device sales, and I was always at the top of the stack ranks. And I did not learn a lesson that many people listening to this still haven't learned, which is how to build a lifestyle to match a budget. Whether that budget is small or whether that budget is big, being able to say, this is the budget, therefore here is the lifestyle. I didn't learn that. I just always made enough money to afford what I wanted. When my colleague has the stroke and my income gets slashed by 40%, and I've got a brand new baby, a big fat mortgage, and my wife no longer working, our lifestyle exceeded our income and we are hemorrhaging cash. I mean, it's almost at the point that bank accounts at zero. And I remember as a husband and as a new father, it's shaking me to my core. Like being a provider is part of my identity. And I was really challenged if I was going to be able to provide for my family. It was extremely stressful. But the idea, knowing I should go into entrepreneurship versus doing it, two very different things. Because at the same time, I'm there to provide for my family.
Right.
I can't just quit my job and cross my fingers that whatever I start is going to work.
Right.
And so I remember I was very strategic about this. I was not going to quit my job and start a company. I wanted to start a company on the side and build it up to the point that I could choose to do my medical job or not. And that's where the mentee came in. I heard that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I looked at my 5, had the names of 5 amazing friends, and realized I had 0 amazing mentors. So as I started to surround myself with mentors, people who had built big businesses that made a big impact in the world, I didn't know what kind of company I was going to start, but I figured if I just focused on getting into relationship with business owners, the path would show itself. And it did. I was able to monetize the mentee into a 6-figure income stream, which on the side, by the way, not too shabby.
Right.
And then I met Jay. And that's when, because this is what's amazing, the dominoes fell perfectly. Had I not focused on upgrading my 5 and had a focus on mentorship, I would have not started the mentee because I would have had 0 mentors to record conversations with. Had I not started the podcast, I would have not turned it into an income stream. Had I not turned it into an income stream, I actually would not have been the candidate to start this company. Because Gary and Jay were looking for somebody who had 3 specific things in their background: strong sales background, strong finance background, who knew how to turn content into dollars. Sales background, President's Club everywhere I've been. Finance background, I majored in accounting. Knew how to turn content into dollars. I turned the mentee into 6 figures in income in 10 months. So those, because I just, without having clarity on what the end destination would be, because I just started knocking one domino down at a time, it ended up putting me into the position that when opportunity was at the corner, I was standing there ready to recognize it and jump on it. And making the actual leap was a very strategic decision. Because I remember telling some of my colleagues at my medical device company that what I was going to be doing. And I remember one guy said to me, "Dude, that is so risky." And I remember thinking to myself, "Dude, you're wrong. You're the one who's in the risky spot right now. They just slashed our income and you're just saying, 'Thank you, sir. May I have another?' I'm going to partner with a billionaire who's going to teach me how to build a company, and I'm going to get paid a salary while I do it. What could be more of a sure thing?"
Right.
So it ended up being the right move.
Yeah. Well, and what a lesson in preparing for whatever the next thing is. I mean, you didn't know that you were going to have that opportunity when you were building the mentee, and you were creating this podcast and this subsequent business that from the ground up, that I'm sure at the beginning you were just pouring time and a small amount of money into, but without knowing where that was leading. But it put you in that position to be able to succeed down the road.
That's right.
So when it came time then to kind of make that transition, actually, let's go back and stay within those early years when the kids were young and you were starting, to continue, whether it was with the mentee or then with the one thing. From a time management perspective, that's a lot of things going on. You have your sales job, then the podcast, then you're building the business with Jay, and you're a dad and a husband. There's a lot of things. How were you at that time? And now has it changed approaching time management and making sure you are still dedicating time to your family?
Yeah. So one of the lies of productivity, it's the fifth lie in the one thing, is the lie of work-life balance. Doesn't exist. If I asked you to stand up and stand on one foot, I would ask, are you balanced or are you balancing? There's no such thing as balance. There is no equilibrium state between work and personal life. It's a constant balancing act or counterbalancing act. And there are times in your life that you have to go out of balance to achieve your goals. The key is to recognize when you're out of balance and to get back into it as fast as possible. When I was in med sales and I was starting the Mentee and the business behind it, we had one kid at the time. I was extremely out of balance because I was working the normal work week. And then we've got this new baby girl that I'm helping with after work hours. And then when it's time for the family to go to bed, that's when I was going into my office to work on the Mentee. And I remember thinking to myself, this is before I even knew of the one thing. I remember thinking, I just have to, even when I'm tired, even if I lay in bed and put my head on the pillow, if I haven't focused on the Mentee at all today, I have to walk downstairs and do a minimum of 10 minutes of work. Because I knew that was one thing I could do. I just had to chip away at it 10 minutes a day, every day. I didn't recognize the strategy behind that now within the one thing I really understand, the idea of identifying that lead domino that's 2 inches. It's not the big domino that reaches from the earth to the moon. It's not the big goal. It's the little thing that if you do that makes the big thing easier or unnecessary. Very rarely did I stop at 10 minutes, but it was just the mental hurdle of all I have to do is go and get to 10 minutes in. And then, I'd crank a half hour, I'd crank an hour, 2 hours. I sacrificed sleep. I sacrificed health. That went on for about 10 months. Then I moved my family from Southern California to Austin to start the company behind the one thing. And I remember within my first few weeks, Jay looked at me and said, dude, oh, by the way, we were about to have our second kid when we moved. So now we're about to go through that cycle all again. And I remember Jay saying to me, you're a father, you're about to have a newborn again, and you're starting up a company. And you just moved your family halfway across the country. Working 40 hours a week is probably not a realistic expectation for you right now because you got to get the company off the ground. But I'm also here to tell you that if you're working a lot more than 40 hours a week, we're going to have a problem because you're going to burn out. Or your wife's going to hate you because you're never going to be around and you're going to stick her with a new baby in a place that she doesn't know. So how do you be as efficient and as effective as possible during the hours that you work? So at a pre-prescribed time, you can shut it down and you can go be a great dad and a great husband. And that was very valuable to me because I came from the school, and you and I have both listened to podcasters who talk about how you got to hustle, you got to grind. It's a lie. Gary talked about this when he was leading a mastermind for some of the top agents. He said, working long hours is cheating. Because you can do the wrong activities. And if you work long enough or hard enough, you can muscle your way to a result and you cheat yourself out of what it means to live a life. And that's when it hit me that my entire career up until this point, I told myself I was working hard for them. But the truth was, I said no to the people that mattered most to me every day. Because I wasn't clear what I needed to say yes to during the day. Here's what I mean by that. When I got off work, I gave the worst of myself to my family. I said no to dinner. I said no to being present because I was checking email. Because during the day, I wasn't clear what my priorities were. I fired up my computer and like everybody else, I checked email. Until I went to my first meeting, got out of the meeting, had 5 minutes. So I checked email. Then somebody called and said, hey, do you got a minute? And I said, yes, because I'm a team player. But I could be really busy all day long and still not accomplish the things that matter most. And by the way, that's most of the people who are listening to this. That is the life that they are living. They are spending their time. They are not investing it. And when I started this company, I knew I had to start living the one thing. Doesn't mean I'm perfect, but I started living it. And that completely changed.
So we talked a lot about the one thing. I don't know that we gave a good kind of overview of the premise of it. So maybe let's take a step back for those who haven't read it, because it is a life-changing concept. Pretty basic, but super, super important.
The one thing is the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. And that's what you mean. It is everything you read in it or listen to the podcast is simple. These are not big, complex ideas. They're simple. And they have a track record of driving extraordinary results. And dominoes is a great way to think of it. Every day you wake up and there are all these things that you could do. We tell ourselves the way to win the day is to get the most things done. But that's not true. The way to win the day is to deliver the highest value, to get the most important things done that drive the greatest results. And this is just like dominoes. When we were kids, we fundamentally understood you didn't knock each domino down individually. You didn't stand one up over here and one over there and one over there and one over there and knock each one down individually. You understood at 5 years old. You stand them up, you line them up, and you just whack the first one.
Right.
And everything else becomes easier or unnecessary. It's the same thing in our business, same thing in our jobs, same thing in our personal lives. We have all these things we could do, view them like dominoes, stand them up, line them up, and just do the most important thing first.
Yep. Perfect. And so when you had that realization, you had that conversation with Jay, which, by the way, awesome. What awesome advice, and what an amazing partnership and a partner to come and tell you that right in the get-go. But what were those changes that you made to make sure, or the steps that you took to make sure that you were being the most effective as possible with your work time?
This is a great story. So my first 90 days, I had to cast a vision for the business that Gary and Jay would sign off on. Sounds simple, but you have to put into context. I've never been a CEO. I've never run a company. I'm used to putting on scrubs and getting my wife to call me McDreamy, or trying to. And here I am sitting in front of a self-made billionaire, and I have to sell him on my vision. And oh, by the way, if they don't buy into my vision, I'm fired. That's no joke. I had to get them to sign off on my vision, drive $100,000 in revenue in 90 days or less, and prove I could recruit amazing talent. Those were the three things I had to demonstrate I could do, or I was actually fired.
Wow.
That's what we call a job description. The 2 to 3 things you have to do exceptionally well, or you're fired. So my career kind of relied on this. So I was a little nervous. And I remember walking into the boardroom, and we have a very simple, shocking. We have a simple framework for a business plan. It's called a GPS. It stands for goal, priorities, and strategies. And just like the GPS on your phone, it is designed to get you where you want to go. And it's a 1-page business plan, because it's really tough to be on the same page if your plan doesn't literally fit on the same page. So I don't care how big your company is. I was on the phone with a Fortune 500 company earlier with 500,000 employees. I can get their entire business plan down to 1 page. Boom, shakalaka. That's called clarity and focus. So I sat down with them. I handed them each the single sheet of paper. At the top was the big goal. That's our one thing for the year. I then had 3 priorities, the major 20% initiatives that would drive 80% of our results. And under each priority was the supporting strategies, those dominoes we'd have to knock down. So we started talking about priority number 1. Gary and Jay asked a bunch of questions about them. I answered them, asked if we were going to move on. They said, yeah. So I started talking about number 2 because it was next on the list. Halfway through number 2, Gary started asking more questions about number 1. Brad, I remember thinking, oh, he must have forgotten. So I answered the questions, answered them, asked if we were good to move on. He said yes. I wrap up number 2, start talking about number 3 because it was next. What do you think he did?
Ask a question about number 1.
That's number 1. Why does everybody else seem to understand where the story is going, but I didn't in the moment? You know, like the circle of trust and yeah, I'm Ben Stiller. I'm not in it. And Robert De Niro's like, yeah. In that moment, I realized there was a method to the madness. I did not know what it was, so I did the best. I answered the questions. Are we good to move on? Sure. So I started talking about number 3 again. And then Gary stopped me. And he asked, Geoff, do you need to do number 3 in order to accomplish number 2? I said, no. He asked, do you need to do number 2 in order to do number 1? I said, no. He then asked me to draw a line between number 1 and number 2. And I literally took out a Sharpie and drew a line across the page. And then he goes, you know what? Even better, rip the page in half. He waited while I took my business plan and tore it down the middle. And then he said something to me that really changed the way I viewed time. He said, don't even think about number 2 or number 3 until you've earned the right to. Here's what shifted. At that time in the business, I was looking at all the things that needed to be done. And I thought I was living the one thing because I went from everything and narrowed it down to the top 3. Look at me. How good am I? But I divided my time equally among them. I worked on number 1 a little bit, and then I moved number 2 a little bit. Then I moved number 3 a little bit, and I just kept rotating, but I wasn't driving any one successfully to completion. And what Gary helped me understand is that everything does not matter equally. If that really is the one thing, then why not give it a disproportionate share of your time and really do that well? Doesn't mean you don't do anything else, but go all in on that sucker. Knock the domino down. And when he gave me that permission, my whole world changed. It was like I saw the world in color for the first time when I had been living in black and white my entire life and never realized it. I suddenly woke up and saw and had clarity on what mattered. And then everything else was just everything else. The result of that is I started getting a lot more done in way less time. And most importantly, with less stress. Because when you're doing the things that matter, you stop artificially inflating the importance of the things that don't matter as much. And you mentally give yourself permission to be present when you're at home.
That's awesome. So let's move to the kind of the home front a little bit, because I know that's obviously been a big focus of yours as well. And now you have, you part of your business is actually focused on it. Yeah. You have a goal setting retreat for couples. Can we talk a little bit about that piece of it? And well, I guess what led you to start that, first of all?
So for 15 years now, my partner, Jay, and his wife, Wendy, every year have hired a babysitter for their kids and gotten out of their house, whether it was a local Airbnb or whether they went to a resort, just so that they could connect as a couple. And they started, they're both business owners, so they would review their goals together. And they started having deeper conversations about their relationship, their marriage, their relationship with the kids, wealth, finances. And over time, they started sharing the story with people, and people would say, well, what do you guys do on the retreat? And so they wrote down some of the questions and they started sharing them. You fast forward, we launched this business, and we get hired by companies of all sizes, from small to the Fortune 500, to come in and help them to install a business operating system that creates a lot of clarity and alignment. And we realized we have all these proven principles for setting goals in a professional capacity. Yet you can't actually achieve your goals if you don't acknowledge your personal goals in addition to your professional goals. And you can't actually achieve your personal goals when you're in a committed relationship if you and your partner are not on the same page. So why don't we just take the proven principles that we use in these companies and just apply them to couples? And the One Thing Couples Goal Setting Retreat was born. And you fast forward, it's one of the best things that we do. And the things that are going to go through somebody's mind who's listening to this, they're probably going, oh, that sounds awesome. Because if you listen to this podcast, you're probably a goal setter. And you're probably immediately going, crap, my significant other isn't. Welcome to the party. The vast majority of people, one is a goal setter, one is not. Sometimes you get both people that is rare. And then the moment you realize that, you also get a little bit of doubt, because you go, well, what happens if our goals aren't the same? And the thing that we have learned is that it's not about your goals being the same. It's about understanding what your goals are. Because marriage is about compromise. It's about supporting the other person. Your goals don't have to be the same. You just have to know what's important to the other person so you can support them. And a perfect example of this was Wendy and Jay. Every year that they sat down, Jay said, I really want to have a ranch someday from now. And Wendy was like, are you kidding me? That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And she just let it go. Well, the next year when they sat down to review their goals, he said, I still want that ranch. She was like, well, that's weird. It's still there. Okay, she let it go. The third year in a row, they sat down, ranch was still there. And she goes, okay, This clearly matters to him. I don't care personally, but it clearly matters to Jay. Later that year, an opportunity was presented. A ranch came available, and they had a very close friend who also wanted a ranch and made a proposition. Why don't we go 50-50 on it? And they realized, oh my gosh, we can actually do that. And because Wendy had seen this on Jay's goals for 3+ years, it wasn't some like midlife crisis, honey, I want a ranch type thing. It was no, this is something that matters to him. And it was a very purposeful yes. They now have this killer ranch in Texas, all this livestock on it, and they love it.
That's so cool. And so when you guys go through that process, when you have couples come out and go through it, can you share maybe some tactical wisdom on how folks,
Sure.
what folks would do to prepare for it and what they would learn at that?
Well, first, let's tie it into the purpose of the show.
Yeah.
One of the exercises that we have people do is identify the roles that you play. So when I grabbed a pen and paper and asked that question to myself, it was, well, one of the roles I play is I'm a husband. Another role is I'm a father. I'm a business owner. I'm a leader. I'm a boss. I'm a consultant. I'm a jump roper. That knows about. You ever see videos of Floyd Mayweather? I look
world-class jump roper. Like we could have a podcast on it.
Yeah, I look like that. These are roles that I play in my life. And we ask people to rank them in order of priority. If you could only play one role, which would it be? Which I remember Jay and I having this conversation. Am I a husband first, then a father? Or am I a father first, then a husband? And the thing that Jay and I decided, this is just our self-talk, we're not projecting this to you, is that in order for us to be the best parents, we have to model what it looks like to be a great romantic partner. By being a great husband, it makes being a great father easier. So that's the order I have chosen. Here's why this matters. In order for you to show up as the best parent, how you show up as a partner to your significant other matters. So this retreat matters because it's about you and your +1 designing a life that you want to live and modeling for your children. What does it look like, not just to set a goal, but to actually have a relationship with the goal, to stay in relationship with it, just like you did with your significant other. And when things go well, you raise the bar. And when things aren't going well, you get back on track. What does it look like to cast a vision for your life and to stay on track and live a life by design rather than a life by default? That's why this matters. So one of the things that we have people do is we have them identify the roles they play. We have them identify their top 3 core values. This is a game changer. So hold on, let me grab this sucker. We created this core values deck. We did research. We identified 140 core values that people can choose from. And just like a deck of cards, you start by going, does this core value resonate with me? Yes or no? And you start dividing it into piles and you narrow it down to a top 3, which this is where these guys text me pictures of their wives doing this. They're like, my wife hates you because she can't get down past 100. But we force you to get down to your top 3 core values. The moment you understand what your values are, you understand they've always been your values and they're a compass for the decisions that you've made. The moment I understood what my wife's core values were, I fundamentally understood her on a deeper level. Even today, she was freaking out at me at lunch. And my natural inclination was to get heated because I'm like, why is she doing this? And I'm going into victim mode. And then I realized, oh my gosh, she's freaking out because there right now is a lack of order in our house. And order is her number 1 core value. I don't care that there's a spill on the carpet, but she does. It violates her need for order. So you suddenly start to look at your partner in a different way and find connection where you might have had conflict. So those are 2 things we do. Then we have them cast long-term vision for their life, like 10, 20 years out from now. 5-year goals, 1-year goals, and how do you guys date each other and date your goals for the next year?
I love that. I mean, I've learned that so far in my short marriage and fatherhood journey is when our relationship is on track and we're working well together, it is so much easier to be a good dad and to show up for my daughter because there's no conflict in our relationship with my wife. But when we're not in alignment, it's like an uphill battle just to make sure that you're in the right state of mind, that you're being the dad that you want to be.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
And it for me, it impacts a lot too, my work life. If things are out of alignment in the personal side, what I'm doing at work becomes a lot harder because I've got so much mental clutter going on that everything else is off.
So true. I mean, I was so foggy my first call today after my wife and I had that chat. She was just all over the place, and it wrecked me mentally, and I could actually feel it in my next call. It's like, I am not here. I am not present in this conversation right now. I'm still thinking about the conversation that we had over lunch. But when we're good, dude, I'm bulletproof.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. So we talked a little bit about some of the struggles you had early on, before you really started implementing the one thing, when you were burning the midnight oil and you were, pushing so hard to get that momentum going. Oftentimes in business podcasts, you get the question of, was there a challenge or a failure that you experienced, but when you look down at forecast into the future, it was actually huge. You grew so much from it. Is there anything on the personal life side or on the fatherhood side specifically that may have been at the time classified as a failure or a challenge that once you came out on the other side, you actually grew from that and it was a huge benefit, a huge learning that propelled you forward?
I mean, I'll speak to something that's relevant with my life right now. I'll preface by saying I don't have all the answers and I'm far from perfect. It's easy to put somebody on a pedestal, especially when you listen to them on a podcast. Cause I remember being in my car, driving from hospital to hospital, listening to all these authorities on their podcast and putting them on this pedestal. So I'm here to knock myself down a few pegs. Just, even though I am where I am professionally, which I pinch myself and I speak about the things I speak about, I still struggle. Even, this is in the last 60 days. I had the realization that I've been on this journey of being a family man with a business, not a businessman with a family. But I came to the distinct realization that while I drive in my business, I mean, boy, do I drive. I am the passenger in my marriage and I am the passenger in my relationship with my kids. That was a hard realization. I have been telling myself this story that my job as the sole provider of the household is to run this company and provide for the family. My wife's job as a stay-at-home mom is to run the household and to manage the kids. That's the story I told myself. Here's what I realized. I am a driver. My wife is not. That's why we work. I didn't want a driver. I wanted somebody who wanted to be my support, but I've been asking her to drive. I've been asking her to drive in things with our house. I've been asking her to drive in things with our kids. She's not wired that way. And I came to this realization like 30 days ago. I've got to get between business and personal matters more. So why am I not leveraging my God-given talents of driving in the area of my life that matters most? And so I asked the question, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it would make driving in my personal life easier or unnecessary? When I look at my goals for the year, I have professional goals and I have personal goals. My number one personal goal is for us to have 48 family experiences. We just moved from Austin to Denver. In Austin, we made the mistake of not living where we live. It was really easy on the weekends to just hang around the house and do the chores, but we never actually experienced all that Austin had to offer before we left. We purposely moved to Denver because it's where we want to live. So we need to live where we live. So the one thing I can do is to have 48 family experiences, but here I am mailing it in on the family experiences. And it really just comes down to an experience doesn't have to be something that's planned. It's being present in the moment. And so I worked it all the way down to a lead domino, a tiny inch, too little domino that if I just effortlessly flick my finger, it will fall. And because the dominoes are lined up, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. So right now, my one thing is to form a habit. The habit of saying yes. When my kids ask, Daddy, can you play right now? Instead of saying no, I have to say yes once a day when I naturally would not have. And this hit me hard. My daughter recently, I was doing the dishes and she said, Daddy, can you play with me? And I said, honey, I got to finish the dishes. And she looked at me and said, Daddy, are the dishes your one thing or am I? Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to grow up being the dad that they think about that was always working. Because Daphne's told me that. She's 7 right now, by the way. And this is the stuff she says to me. She says, Daddy,
you're in trouble.
You care about your work more than you care about us. What? No, that's not true. She goes, I watch you. You're always in the office, but you don't actually spend that much time with us. You care about your work more than us. And her perception, that is the truth. Her perception is the reality. I refuse to let that be the case.
Yeah.
So that's a journey I'm on now. How do I become the type of person that they remember as saying yes?
That's powerful. Powerful that you recognized it. And then I love how that just the example of how you boiled that down to what the one thing is that you're acting on now to make that your new reality.
Here's what's important about all of this. Wherever you are, you're listening to this show because you're clearly goal oriented and there is a vision of where you want to be. It might be clear, it might not be. Your vision might be, it's not where I am now. It's really easy to hate on your stepping stones. Something a mentor of mine shared with me, said, don't hate on your stepping stones, dude. I know you're not happy with where you are right now in med sales, but understand this is a stepping stone to get you to where you want to be. And it's so easy to look at the gap between where you are and where you want to be and to hate on it. But I'm here to tell you, the path of mastery, the moment you start to view it as a journey you go down rather than a destination that you arrive at, it starts to feel achievable and attainable. I am still on a path of mastery in many areas of my life. And this story is one of them. I am not the best dad. I am not the best husband, but you best believe I am having a relationship with that goal. And I am asking, how do I make progress today and discard the idea of perfection?
I love it. One question I like to kind of wrap things up on that I think is oftentimes gets down to the core of what you've learned in your experience as a dad is the time machine question of if you could go back in time, talk to yourself as a new dad, right? When your first kid was born, or another way of looking at it is if a very close personal friend who is just having their first kid, is there one piece of advice based on your experience as a dad to date that you would give to that new dad, Geoff Woods?
Yes. And the answer came to me so fast, it wasn't even funny. Decide your habits, decide your future. There is a quote in the one thing from F.M. Alexander that people do not decide their habits. Or I'm sorry, people do not decide their future. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. So I even have a shirt and a Yeti that says, decide your habits, decide your future. Because the thing that I've realized, you are only one habit away from something extraordinary. As a new dad, the thing I would have said to myself is decide your habits, decide your future. You want to be the greatest dad in the world to your kids? What's the habit you need to form that would make you the best dad to your kids? I'm doing it right now. Say yes once a day when I naturally would not have. I even did this with my daughter when she was like 4 or 5. We got 2 kittens. She was so persistent about it. It was crazy. My wife and I were dead set against it. Daphne was more certain. She won. I am in trouble, by the way. And I remember we got these kitties and she was just over the moon. She was strutting around the house talking about how she was going to be the best mommy for the kitties. And I remember sitting around the counter one day and asking her, do you really want to be the best mommy for the kitties? And she said, yeah. And I went, well, honey, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. Welcome to the conversations of the Woods household, by the way. And I asked her, what's the habit you can form that would make you the best mommy for the kitties? And she thought about it, Brad. I mean, I remember watching the wheels turn and then the light bulb went off. She looked at me with all this excitement and said, Give them space when they need it. And my wife was standing right there, and she did not think that was funny, which tells you where she learned that. Just give me space. And I looked at her, I said, funny, what about food? She went, oh, and food. Daphne, what if your one thing every day was to feed the kitties? And she was like, yeah. And that became her one thing. And every day I would ask her, Daphne, what's your one thing? And she'd say, feed the cats, Dad. And she'd go feed it. And then we have this calendar called a 66-day challenge calendar. It's a single sheet of paper. It's got 66 days on it. Every day you do your one thing, you put a big X on it, because pretty soon it's less about doing the one thing, more about not breaking the chain. And every day she fed them, she put the X. She fed them, she put the X. And I remember it was a short period of time that all of a sudden I walked downstairs and she was just feeding the cats. And I had this proud papa moment, because in that moment, Brad, I realized we have earned the right to move on to kitty litter.
Domino number 2.
And then I learned that you can't force your goals on your children. So that's the advice I'd give is whenever you have a gap in your life between where you are and where you want to be, you're missing a habit.
That's awesome.
So identify that one thing, make it a habit that sticks.
Jeff, that's beautiful. Man, I love the chat. Where would you point people to learn more about you, to follow, find things about the goal setting, couples retreat, all of the good stuff?
So Geoff Woods is the name. It's spelled Geoff. If you Google me, I think I'm the one that comes up most. So you can find my LinkedIn there. The website is theonething.com. And that's with the number 1. You can learn about our couples retreat there, theonething.com / I think it's theonething.com / if you just do theonething.com /event, it'll redirect there. I know that. And if you want a 66-day challenge calendar to do this with, do a family 66-day challenge. That is cool. Teaching your kids to form the habit of forming habits, game changer. So I've done family 66-day challenges. You can download that on the website. The podcast is The One Thing. The book is The One Thing. You'll find it.
That's sweet. We'll have it all linked up on the show notes. But Jeff, always a pleasure to chat with you, my brother. And thanks for carving out some time. This was incredibly insightful, jam-packed with actionable advice as always. So appreciate you.
Thanks, Brad.
All right. We'll wrap it up there. We're hitting record again because we're getting back into the juice.
Yeah. Well, this is a example of why setting goals as a couple matters. My wife and I a few years ago did our couples goal setting retreat. And I remember we asked, what matters to us someday from now? And my wife looked at me and said, or she asked, how long do we have to be in Austin for? She and I both knew it. Like, Austin's a great city, but we're not Texans. It never really felt like home. But that was hard for her to ask me, because as long as I'm running this company, I got to be in Austin. It's where Gary and Jay are. It's where the company is. And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, what would extraordinary look like someday from now? We both acknowledge someday from now, we want to be closer to mountains. It just pine trees, mountains. It calls our soul. And so she asked the question, what's one thing we can do this year to feel like we're on track? And we figured out we would probably want to know where we would want to live in the next 5 years. So in 10 or so years, we could choose to live where we want to live. And we said, well, if in 5 years we want to know where we want to live, then this year, let's take one vacation to a mountain location that we might want to call home. Because if every year for the next 5 years, we scout a different location, we should have a sense of where we want to be.
Sure.
So great. We picked Denver for very specific reasons and booked a trip. Then COVID hit. The world changed. And as I started to have conversations with all the companies that I work with, I kept hearing all these leaders say, I think the future of work is virtually based, physically enhanced. And when I asked what they meant about that, they said, I think the majority of people can be virtual. We'll still have hubs. Like, people will still come in for strategic reasons, but we're going to be more virtually based, physically enhanced. I then had a board meeting and I looked at my partners and said, as a company that teaches companies to be productive, if that's the future of work, shouldn't we be one of those companies so we have authority? And they went, well, that's a good point. And I said, so are we in agreement we're going virtual? They said, yeah. And I said, if that's the case, do I have to live in Austin? They said, I guess not. I literally boarded a flight to Denver 2 weeks later and bought a house on that trip.
Wow.
But
That was your guys' vacation you had planned?
yep, that was it. But here's the thing, because we sat down together and asked what matters someday from now, stripping away the constraints of today, we said mountains. Because we said mountains, we knew we wanted to know where that would be in 5 years. Because we knew where we needed to be in 5 years, we knew we had to take one trip this year. Because we blocked the trip, I happened to have this conversation with my partners 2 weeks earlier. It shifted from being let's scout it out to, do we want to live here? And when we were here, we were like, yeah, we do. Okay. Can we find a house? We did. Can we put an offer? We did. And now I'm standing in that house.
That's awesome. I love it. Oh man, that's great. Well, nice. Congrats on the move then. That's good stuff, dude.